traffic. You are ordered to disperse now to permit the safe flow of pedestrian traffic. If you do so voluntarily, no charges will be placed against you. If you refuse to disperse, you will be placed under arrest.
Move back! Move back! Move back! I can't breathe! I can't breathe! Say his name! Say his name! George Floyd! Say her name! George Floyd!
For the past 2 weeks, protests that began in Minneapolis over the death of an unarmed African-American man, George Floyd, at the hands of police have exploded across the country and around the world. Floyd's killing is the latest in a seemingly never-ending string of deaths of African Americans in racially charged encounters with the police. Now, the protests are the biggest civil rights demonstrations since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King more than 50 years ago. And with the backdrop of a country already torn apart by a global pandemic, this seems like one of the most pivotal moments in modern American history. So in this special episode, we wanted to speak with people at the forefront of today's civil rights movements. We've spoken to the president of the NAACP, the mother of murdered black teenager Trayvon Martin, who's now an activist and political candidate, as well as DeRay Mckesson, a leading voice in the Black Lives Matter movement. But we start with a man at the center of these seismic events, Philonise Floyd, the brother of George Floyd. Mr. Floyd, thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you.
So today is a big day for you and your family. They officially upgraded the charges against Derrick Johnson and finally charged the other 3 officers with aiding and abetting the murder of your brother. How are you feeling about that today?
I'm happy. I'm happy that they upgraded the charges. I want them to get to first-degree murder because I think it was premeditated. But first, I just want to thank God that that even happened.
Do you think that today's upgraded charges would have come about without the massive national protests that have happened?
If we didn't react like we did, what do you think would happen? The only people that are not working, nothing really would be done unless we out here stepping.
I don't think it would have happened. But everybody was so tired. So everybody is protesting right now. I even seen the Amish protest. You know, it's deep right now. The world is all screaming out, George Floyd, we want justice. George Floyd, we want justice.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
I just want to thank everybody who contributed to getting us one step closer to justice. And they're not just doing it for me, they're doing it for my family too, but we're doing this for the world right now because we all are united right now.
We can't breathe! We can't breathe!
Maybe you have a message for all those people out there protesting and voicing their displeasure with what happened to your brother. What's your message to them?
I want them to protest peacefully. That's what George would want. That's what I would want. That's what the world needs. But when people sit there and kill people like that in front of kids and children out there, it's not good. It's not good for the world. Nobody wanted to see that. Nobody. And nobody should have to see that. My thing is, life is precious. I tell my mom that when she was alive, I used to tell her that. I tell my brothers that all the time. If you need me, I got you. The police officers, they supposed to serve and protect, and they didn't do that day at all. They killed my brother, murdered him on the spot.
George Floyd! Say his name! 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 George Floyd!
Sybrina Fulton is the mother of Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old shot in Florida in 2012, whose death sparked the Black Lives Matter movement. She is now running for a seat on the Miami-Dade Board of County Commissioners. Sybrina Fulton, thank you for taking time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question, I mean, I'm here in Santa Monica. Last night there were tanks, the National Guard, curfews. What's your reaction to the images that you're seeing on television right now?
My reaction is people are angry. It's absolutely about what we saw recently with the trauma of George Floyd being killed. It's definitely about that. It's about Breonna Taylor. It's about Ahmaud Arbery. It's about Trayvon Martin. It's about Oscar Grant. It's about Jordan Davis. It's about Dante Hamilton. It's about Eric Garner. It's about all of those names and more. This is a reaction to people just being sick and tired of being afraid of being shot and killed, and nobody's held accountable. People have been too silent, they've been too passive, and they're saying this is it.
The whole world had to watch George Floyd beg for his life and die on camera. That's the second I can't breathe. What do you want us to do? We can't take a knee. We can't protest. We've been doing all this docile shit. For what? Our blood's still being spilled.
We definitely want people to march. We definitely want people to be heard. We definitely want people to protest. We want to see that happen because we feel like that's the only way that we're going to get people to listen to us. Other than that, it's business as usual. And we're continuing to lose African-American, brown and black boys based on what somebody else's mindset is about that person being a threat.
George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd! George Floyd!
Ally shit. Do not leave. Do not leave.
We will be slaves to the system no more!
DeRay Mckesson is an activist who's been a leading voice in Black Lives Matter since the 2014 killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. DeRay, thank you for your time.
It's good to be here.
You said, and I'm going to quote you, "When I see people on the street, it is frustration." And it takes me back to 2014 when we were in the street in Ferguson, 2015 when we were on the street in Baltimore. It's a reminder of how little courage we have had from political leaders to change the system. Minneapolis is no exception. Now, what has changed, if anything, since Ferguson?
Yeah, so let me zoom out a little bit and sort of frame the context for where we are today. The police have actually killed more people, not less, since the protests in St. Louis in 2014. The only sort of glimmer of hope is 100 largest cities, there actually has been a statistically significant decrease in police violence, but that decrease has actually been offset by an increase in rural communities and suburban communities in a way that has completely overwhelmed and overshadowed the good work happening in cities. So overall, the police have killed more people, not less. A third of all the people killed by a stranger in the United States is actually killed by a police officer. 2019 was the first year ever where Black people were more afraid of being killed by an officer than being killed by community violence. And even when we think about 2020, in March and April of 2020, the police killed at the same rate and the same number as they did in March and April of 2019. COVID, quarantine, lockdown did nothing to the rate and number of how many people the police killed. So that is what we see in the street right now, is people being rightly frustrated because the police have killed anywhere in between 400 and 800 people as of today. And that is unacceptable.
I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe!
We were told that there would be solutions coming. We were told that political leaders would have the courage to implement solutions because we know what they are, and we were lied to.
There seems to be an element within the protest that has different goals to Black Lives Matter or Campaign Zero. Sometimes there's violence, sometimes there's looting. What do you say to these people?
So I always want to be clear about the language that we use. The only violence that I've seen is the violence of the police.
Yo,
It was the violence of the police that caused people to take to the street in the first place. I have seen property damage, and I get that property damage really upsets a lot of people. There's this interesting essay that I would encourage everybody to read. It's called In Defense of Looting. And she says that there is no social change that's ever happened in the history of this country that wasn't precipitated by property damage. The Boston Tea Party, like anything she can name that like changed society, because the idea of property is so rooted in America. So in that context, this actually makes a little more sense to me in this moment. But again, I've not seen violence from the protesters. I've seen people in the street armed with the truth in a cell phone. I've seen those people shot with tear gas. I've seen those people shot with rubber bullets. I know somebody personally who has now permanently lost her left eye because she was out in the street and all she had was her cell phone, right? That to me is violence. I in no way will ever argue that that is comparable to a stolen TV or like a broken pane of glass.
So National Guard soldiers have been called up here in Santa Monica, where I live. It happened last night. At least 75 cities have seen protests. More than 24 cities have imposed curfews, the most since 1968, after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Is this a catalyst for change? Do you see this as a positive or a negative? Why is this seemingly capturing the zeitgeist of the nation?
You think about the death of Mike Brown in 2014. Mike Brown got killed by a police officer and they left his body in the street for 4.5 hours. That was enough to push people over the edge. And you know, like I know, the protests spread all across the country. We were in the street for 400 days. Then it was, it was Baltimore, it was McKinney, Texas.
I will light you up. Get out.
There was Sandra Bland and there was Walter Scott, right? It was a string because people were waking up to realize these weren't isolated events. These were the byproduct of a system that was both designed to do this and will do it until we transform it and turn it into something else.
Now, until you take the badge off and decide to stand something for more than yourself and this badge, we gonna believe you. We gonna understand you.
Take that badge off right now and mark
You angry. You have another reason.
right now and mark
Your reason is totally different than everybody else's. You can see it. You angry.
You want that badge.
Derrick Johnson is the president of the NAACP, the storied civil rights institution that has been working to advance justice for African Americans for over a century. Mr. Johnson, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is this a tipping point or is this more of the same?
I think it's a tipping point. We have not seen this level of engagement in over 50 years. We're talking about a country that has been paralyzed with divisiveness for the last 4 years. In the last 80 days, we have gone from a global pandemic, an anemic federal response, the realization that African Americans were disproportionately impacted as a result of a gap in access to health care, to incidents in Georgia, in Louisville, Kentucky, Central Park, and watching someone murdered, broad daylight, people standing around saying, "You're killing him," and police officers on his back and his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
He's not responsive right now. He's not responsive right now, bro.
And then go from there and realize that the district attorney in that area was refusing to bring forth justice for that community, for that family, only resulting in peaceful protests, unfortunately spiraling into some of the most horrific riots we have seen in over 50 years. We're standing in this moment at a juncture of determining what type of nation are we going to be. We're going to be one that's inclusive, that's just, where everyone is afforded equal protection of the law, or we're going to continue in this direction. And if so, we're going to destroy the democracy that we all come to live under.
What is your message to police chiefs across America today?
And the majority of police chiefs, they actually have the type of compassion that's necessary to govern a police department. I'm one who believes that it's not the majority of police officers or police chiefs. I think it is a minority. We have to get away from this notion that we must protect police officers when they have been bad actors. Unfortunately, there are far too many police officers who've been getting away with bad acts, able to move from department to department, not being properly disciplined, able to shield their records behind some union contract. Those are practices that we need to move away from, and we need to move towards a more accountable, transparent police department.
The vibe that I got from the cops is the ones that were standing there on the front line in the beginning, they wanted violence. They were looking for escalation. They were getting themselves like pumped up for a fist fight in front of a bunch of people that are like, we just want our voices heard.
There's a lot of just regular people out there who are frustrated and confused and angry. What's your message for them?
Get engaged. NAACP is one of many vehicles. We ask you to go to naacp.org/engage to become a volunteer, to help us turn the vote out, help us promote a message, help us sow the seeds of hope, because with hope we win. If we are in despair, we lose because we are paralyzed. We can win, but we can only win if you get engaged. The Civil Rights Movement gave us the Voting Rights Act. It gave us the Housing Act. It gave us the Civil Rights Act. It was a result of peaceful protests, people taking to the street to say, we need a better society, and we're in that moment right now.
This is America!
This incident has seen many cities, hundreds of cities, where people are rising up in protest. Speaking of that, the man who killed your son, Trayvon, George Zimmerman, was not arrested until mass protest, mass political movement.
People say, the people say,
It seems that the protests also played a part in the rapid arrest of the murder of George Floyd. Does it take massive outrage and people taking to the streets to get justice or to get people arrested for these crimes?
I would answer that and say yes.
Police, the government, none of the people that's above us like any of us coming together. They want us to be separated for a reason. Even though they good, what we call good, that's not good to us. They not protecting the people. They hurting us more than anything. And even if we try to be peaceful, it ain't no peaceful protest. They gonna come at us aggressive, we gotta come back aggressive the same way.
When we unite and we come together in numbers, that's the only time we're being heard.
No peace!
But why does it take us protesting? Why does it take us signing petitions and writing letters and making calls and doing all these other things in order to get an arrest, when for other people, the arrest happens immediately? If my son, Trayvon, who was 17 years old, had shot and killed the person who killed him, Trayvon would have been in jail that same night. And so I don't understand why people don't see that. You know, why people don't understand that concept. We are treated differently.
You trapped in his breathing right there, bro. Okay. Like, you don't think that what it is, bro?
If I talk to another African American, they clearly see the problem with George Floyd. They clearly can see that a knee on a neck is not somebody that's being treated like a human being. That he was treated like an animal, and we have to get other people to see, whether it's white people, whether it's white supremacists, whoever. We need to have other people to see that what has happened here is wrong.
It's not our time to kneel anymore. If more of that race were able to put the pride aside, put everything else aside, and move forward as a unit for this entire nation, we'll be in a better place.
We're living in the middle of an uprising. 35 cities yesterday and counting are uprising. We deserve, we demand, we deserve our breath, y'all. We are uprising not just for Black death. We are uprising for Black life.
Took a week and a half of national protests, the largest since the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, a change of prosecutor, and global outrage to make this happen. Why do you think that is?
Every time you look up, a Black life is somebody's dying. No matter if it's a woman or a man, somebody's dying. So when my brother passed away and everybody's seen it on camera and broad daylight.
You stopping his breathing right there, bro.
Yeah, can't breathe. Okay. That hurt. He said he couldn't breathe. Eric Garner said the same thing. I can't breathe. And the guy just had his knee on his neck, wouldn't get off, cut all his wind off. That had to hurt. That has, I'm talking about anybody with any sense of humanity in them would have known not to do that.
The one right there needs to go to jail because he's actually he's stopping his breathing.
I just want justice for my brother, and I know as the President of the United States, we can get that. All he has to do is just go out and just let these cops know here in Minnesota that that was wrong, and it's not good, man. He's seen it, we all seen it.
You know, when I think about this moment, I think about we are seeing America being exposed exactly for what America is in this moment. And we've always believed that we can transform even the worst things into something better. I think about the problems that we see today as present but not permanent. We have seen this country organize. We've seen Black people organize around things that we were told would always be this way. And our lived reality has shown that that is just not true. We did it the first time and we were learning so much, right? We were like learning the data. We were trying to understand what the solutions were. And when you think about it now in 2020, we know. So it's like, we know what to do. We know that we can ban chokeholds, right? But only 28 of the 100 largest cities even ban chokeholds. Like this is about political courage. It's not that we don't know the answers now. I remember being in the street in 2014 and people asked me what to do. And we were like, you know, we had big ideas, but we didn't know how to necessarily get there. 2020, we know. So it really is a lack of political courage.
When you talk about lack of political courage, President Trump has called the protesters anarchists and thugs. What is his administration doing during this crisis? And are they showing leadership or are they not?
So this is one of the things that is sort of helpful in this moment is that the president has very little control over local police departments. So there are 18,000 police departments in the country. Other than funding them through the DOJ, almost no president has ever conditioned funding to police departments on their willingness or ability or refusal to do anything around police violence. So the president is sort of just using his bully pulpit in ways that aren't helpful, but structurally, there's not really a lot there. As you know, he can call in the National Guard, or he could militarize apparatuses of the federal government to intervene locally. But directly, it's really not a presidential thing. It is mostly a local leader thing. So you think about in California, there's a law that says that any investigation of an officer that lasts more than a year can never result in discipline, regardless of the outcome. That is a failure of leadership. In Oregon, the law says that any officer can use deadly force if they think you just committed a felony or if they think you're about to commit a felony. The fact that that still exists is a failure of leadership.
The president has also claimed that Antifa is behind a lot of these protests. Is there any truth to that?
You know, it's not lost on me that there are a set of people who benefit from a race war. It's not lost on me that there are people who do come to protest just to wreak havoc and not in the spirit of what called people. And you think about just a couple weeks ago when we saw white people armed with guns talking about we need to reopen the country, and he didn't release a whole set of statements condemning those people. The police treated those people completely fine, even though they were armed and dangerous. So, you know, who knows what's going on with extremists in this moment. I think that there is some truth to it. I think there's very little truth to what Donald Trump is saying.
But New York is going to have to toughen up, and we'll send you National Guard if you want. It's terrible. Of all the places.
I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights.
President Trump said in his speech on Monday night that he'd deploy thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers. What's your response to yesterday's promise for escalation?
It was a sad day in our nation's history when the commander-in-chief tried to create theater during a moment when we should all be concerned on how to repair. In fact, I have lost any confidence that he can lead. He will always go to a comfort zone of divisive behavior using prompts and trying to create some level of theater to show strength, when in fact, those of us who can really see it know that the emperor has no clothes and it's all weakness.
You've expressed frustration with President Trump's administration. What message do you have for him? What message do you have for our government?
You know, it's almost now we are at a lost cause.
George Floyd! George Floyd!
I have not seen him demonstrate the intellectual capacity to comprehend the need to serve all of America, not just those who reflect his mirror image. He has not even demonstrated the ability to grasp some of the most basic needs of the office of the presidency, such as making sure that all Americans have a safe and healthy environment. With all of the warning signs leading up to this pandemic, he ignored them. He has not demonstrated the intellectual understanding of why these things are a priority. So I don't have anything to say. I think the only words that we must say as Americans, as African Americans, is at the ballot box in November, where we line up and we ensure that the outcome of the election represent the needs and interests of a healthy democracy.
Dan Rather recently said, and I'll paraphrase him, that never before has a nation needed calming words from a president, and never before will the words from that president exacerbate the situation more, or something to that effect. Do you think the actions and the words of President Trump is actually exacerbating this problem, this issue?
I think from the time he took office, he has not been able to resist the tendency to target and create otherness, whether it was through xenophobia, racism, gender discrimination. He has shown an inability to see people outside of his vision. That's unfortunate. That's not a true leader. And because of that, we sit in this situation now.
There's so many politicians that are out here saying one thing and doing the other, leading these people astray. Where are our leaders? It's not like we're against our president. We want the president to do good so bad. Nobody's leading. Nobody's holding people accountable.
Shit. What needs to happen? I think a lot of people are frustrated. They said, look, this can't continue to happen. It can't continue in Ferguson, in Baltimore, now in Minneapolis, with your son, Trayvon. It cannot continue. What needs to happen so that this stops?
Well, I think people have gotten too comfortable and nonchalant with the loss of a Black life, a Black or brown life, and that needs to stop. We can't have double standards. Like in the case of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia, you can't take your gun home and go sleep in your bed comfortably as if nothing happened. There was a life lost, a human being. And I don't think people understand that. They don't understand the severity of losing a life and how much it affects the family. We need to change laws so that we make sure that when that happens, that somebody happens, they need to have procedures in place within the police department across the board. So they need to develop an outside organization, an outside community relations board, or they have to have somebody that's in place that they can investigate that. They also need to do a background check, whether it's a police officer or not. Have they had problems before with dealing with African Americans? Have they had problems before with discipline? We need to know those type of things.
You know, we try so many different methods, like politics, economics, trying to develop ourselves, but we continue to see this violence happening so consistently, and a lot of us is just tired and honestly, just sad.
Yeah, I think that this will be a test for all of us. We know what works and what doesn't work. We have a set of political leaders who seem to be interested in making change. And we also have a set of people who aren't directly impacted by these issues, who are finally accepting that this is really structurally wrong. But I think that this moment will be a test of organizing.
So speaking of organizing, you've been an organizer for Black Lives Matter, and now you're the co-founder of Campaign Zero. What is Campaign Zero and what are the goals?
Yeah, so remember, when we think about the movement, we think about Black Lives Matter, this is a big space, right? That we think about the movement as not defined by any one organization or founded by a set of people. Just like you saw in this moment, the protests spread organically. The protests sort of moved all across the country at their own pace, which was really beautiful. It wasn't because one or two or three people said it should do that. And that's the same thing that happened in 2014. And when I think about Campaign Zero, we started because we were like, there has to be something systemic, like something is causing the numbers to look the same all across the country. We didn't know what it was, but we were like, there has to be, like, we just don't know. So we put 10 things down that we were like, we think these are solutions. There were 2 that we were sort of alone in being like, we think these are big levers. So there was the use of force policies and police union contracts. We had very little data when we first launched. We were like, we're gonna collect the data, and we just got lucky that we were right. So when we looked at the use of force policies, we realized that these really were the biggest levers. And then we looked at the contracts. There were things in the contracts and the laws that we continue to be shocked by. And we called it Campaign Zero for a couple reasons. One is that we were like, we can live in a world where the police kill nobody. Like, we can get to zero. We can also live in a world where we help people realize that the majority of what we ask the police to do is not a policing function at all. Only 5% of the arrests that happen in this country are for violent crime. That's an FBI number, and that's been pretty flat for at least the last 20 years. But we staff and resource police departments as if it's like 80% violent crime happening in communities. You know, we arrest more people for weed than all violent crime combined. So there are 2 big goals. The first big goal, again, is to reduce the power of the police. So that is use of force policies and police union contracts. And the second is to shrink the role of the police. Do we need armed people responding to car crashes, to missing kids, to cats stuck in trees? We don't. To people in mental health crises, we should find sets of people who are trained experts to focus on those, and the resources should follow those people. There will always be a small number of people where there needs to be some sort of intervention, and I'm not convinced that has to be the police, but we don't need to fund it like we do right now.
Y'all just like us, but y'all got a badge on. We have every right to be out here. We did not bother y'all. And we were out here peacefully for 3 days. Violence is y'all language. Don't put that on us. You're not gonna put that on us.
You've said in the past, and I'll quote you, the outrage we feel and the justice we demand will reverberate through Minneapolis and the country as a whole. We are done dying. This moment calls for us to unify, uplift the family, and pursue justice. Now, this has launched a We Are Done Dying campaign. What are the aims of this initiative?
Well, We're Done Dying, our campaign is to say we're no longer a victim of government. We need to demand that police departments are more accountable. We need to demand that district attorney offices are more accountable, that our education systems are more accountable, that our health delivery system is more accessible. We're done dying complaining about the things that are wrong. We must fight in order to win and to ensure that the quality of life that's afforded to one community is afforded to all community. We are done dying. It is time for us to take up the mantle and fight, and November is the battleground.
So the NAACP recently put out a petition demanding justice for George Floyd with some pretty specific demands, including sweeping national police reform. You know, how do these demands translate into action?
Well, nothing happens if you have the wrong set of individuals sitting in office. In November, it's that moment for all Americans to stand up and say, are we going to be a nation that look backwards and go backwards? Or are we going to be a nation that look forward and go forward? This election is one of the most significant elections. We say that all the time, but I think we now get it, that the lack of civility that we're now living under, the level of racial hatred and xenophobia germinating from the White House has created a pandemic of emotions, a pandemic of thought, a pandemic of actions that we must take up to change the direction of where we're going. And if we do that, the policy priorities that we are laying out will have the ability to come into being.
We recently spoke to former Attorney General Eric Holder about the importance of this next electoral cycle.
Now, I'm not an alarmist, but our democracy is on the ballot in November.
So for the NAACP, how important is November? And what do you plan to do to push the vote?
November is our number one priority. There is no policy change without an election outcome in which African Americans increase our participation substantially. We are targeting specifically the areas where we know we can increase the turnout, where we have to increase the turnout, so that the elections can reflect the needs and interests not only of our community, but to reflect the needs and interests for a stable democracy. But in November, it is our hope that we put in place people in office who understand the impact of structural racism born in public policy. The structural racism is seen when a child is born into a zip code. That zip code will determine the potential of that child by the quality of air that that child breathes, the quality of the water that that child drinks, the quality of the education that that child receives, the access to the health care for that child. All of the social determinative is based on where a child is born in this country. November can help us repair the democracy, identify the structural racial policies that are in place, and advance policy that can benefit all Americans in a way in which we can truly have a just society.
There have been demonstrations in all 50 states, which is a testament to the widespread reaction about your brother's death. How do we move from the protests to actual change? What do you and your family want to see happen?
We want to see all those guys arrested on first-degree murder, convicted. That's what we want to see. That's justice. My brother died. He's not gonna never be here again. His kids will never see him again in life. No man should have to go through that. No man. A child is gonna grow up without a father. Do you know how many kids need a father? And you just took one away? It's not right. It's not right.
That's right. That is changing the world. Wait, you know.
He did what?
That changed the world. That changed the world.
Do you see this as a potential for positive change?
I do. I'm always hopeful because it's about changing mindsets. And I know that being a police officer is very difficult. And a lot of people don't know it, but my dad was a police officer here in Miami. He retired. If more good officers spoke up, if more good officers said that this is not right, if more good officers said that was a human being, and what if it was your son or your brother or somebody in one of your loved ones that had a knee to their neck until they stopped breathing? And I think a lot of officers witnessed that on television, just like we did, or social media, just like we did, and said, there's something wrong. There's definitely something wrong with the system. And what they're simply saying now with all the protests going on now is they're saying, listen, what about the other officers who were there who did not say anything?
The man ain't moved yet, bro. The man ain't moved yet, bro.
They want those people as well to be arrested. And not only arrested, but a thorough investigation done.
Yeah, 987, you just killed that, bro.
Y'all just really just killed that man.
You just really killed that man, bro.
Do you think that things have gotten better or worse since your son's death?
I think things are on I think things are getting better. And the reason why I say that is because now, if you look at a lot of the protests out there, it's not just African Americans. You see people of all races, of all ages that are out there and they're protesting and they're saying this is wrong because they've seen it. Now, I think if you think for 1 second, well, what if the video camera wasn't there? Then this would be a totally different outcome because we would have heard that Mr. Floyd resisted arrest, and that's why these things happened to him. But we clearly saw that that he was not a resisting arrest. His hands were cuffed behind him. He was barely moving. He only was able to move his mouth when he said, "I can't breathe," and when he called out to his mother.
Get in the car.
Mama.
Get up and get in the car right.
I can't.
I gave y'all the opportunity to get in, bro. I told you can't win.
My knee.
If people don't get that, then I don't even know if they have a heart beating inside of them.
What would you say, to the mothers of these men who are being killed? Or what would you say to all mothers?
Well, I have two things. I have one that I would tell the mothers who have not lost a child through senseless gun violence. I would tell them to please support us who have. I would tell them to, make sure that they're working to help to get laws changed. I would tell them to work through a nonprofit organization who have the same goals in mind, such as the National Action Network, the Urban League, the NAACP. There are organizations that will help you work through that. So that's what I would tell mothers who have not lost a child. I would tell them to continue to cover their child, to make sure when they're going out on the street that they're covered in the blood of Jesus, and they say a prayer for their children, because this is serious. This is life or death for us. And then for the mothers who have lost a child to senseless gun violence, I would tell them to hold their head up high. It was not their child's fault. People try to make you feel like your child caused his own death, but it's not true. And I would tell them to surround themselves with positive people. I would tell them to make sure that they have praying people around them. And I would tell them to continue to fight. Don't give up. Do something that's special in your child's name. We do a peace walk here in Miami every year because we celebrate Trayvon's birth and not his death.
Sybrina Fulton, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your ongoing work, and good luck in the upcoming election.
Thank you so much.
I know this is a hard time, Philonis, and we just want to say thank you for your time today, and also condolences to you and your family.
Thank you.
Derrick Johnson, thank you for your time today, and also thank you for your ongoing work.
Thank you.
I'm excited to come back to you in a couple years and be like, we did it. It was hard. It was wild. And it almost took us out the game, but we did it.
I hope so. From your lips to God's ears.
Cool. Good to be here.